My name is Haley Morrison. I'm 26. At exactly 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in the Riverside County Courthouse, I stood in my $18 thrift store blazer while my own father held up a photo of me wearing a cafe apron and told Judge Marcus Peaton that I was mentally incapable of managing a checking account, let alone a $4.8 million estate. Your Honor, my father's voice boomed across the courtroom, his hand gesturing at the blown-up photo on an easel. This is what my daughter has become, a waitress. She serves coffee and wipes down tables for minimum wage. My father intended his fortune to be managed responsibly and, clearly, he paused for effect, turning to look directly at me. Clearly, Haley has demonstrated she lacks the judgment to handle millions. My mother, Linda, sat beside him in her $800 suit, dabbing at completely dry eyes with a tissue. The courtroom had maybe 30 people scattered across the gallery, distant cousins, family friends who'd known Grandpa William, a few reporters covering probate disputes, all of them watching me stand there in clearance rack clothes while my parents, who hadn't worked a day in the past 15 years, argued I was too incompetent to receive my own inheritance. Judge Peaton leaned forward, looking at me over his reading glasses. Ms. Morrison, is it true you're currently employed as a waitress? Yes, Your Honor. And you believe you're qualified to manage a complex estate worth nearly $5 million? My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. Your Honor, Because from where I'm sitting, Judge Peaton continued, his voice dripping with something that sounded like amusement, it seems your parents might have a point. A waitress handling millions? He shook his head slowly. That's quite a leap. The courtroom erupted in laughter, not nervous chuckles, full, open laughter. My father's attorney smirked. Several people in the gallery actually slapped their knees. My mother's shoulders shook with what she wanted everyone to believe were sobs, but looked a lot more like suppressed giggles. My face burned so hot I could feel my pulse in my teeth. My hands clutching the defendant's table went completely numb. But I didn't move, didn't speak. Something inside me had already shifted 3 weeks ago, and now I just waited. Before I go on, if stories about standing up for yourself mean something to you, please hit like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and what time is it there. Let me take you back 21 years to when I was 5 years old. I remember the exact day my parents dropped me off at Grandpa William's house on Sycamore Lane. It was a Saturday afternoon in September, and my father carried my small suitcase up the porch steps while my mother stayed in the car with the engine running. How long will I be here? I asked. Just a little while, sweetheart, my father said, but he wouldn't look at me. Grandpa William wants to spend some time with you. Grandpa opened the door before we even knocked. He was 72 then, tall and solid, with silver hair and hands that smelled like the wood polish he used on his furniture. There's my girl, he said, scooping me up. We're going to have an adventure, you and me. My father set down my suitcase. We'll call you, Dad. Sure you will, Grandpa said, but there was no anger in his voice, just resignation. They didn't call, not that weekend, not the next month. By Christmas, I had my own room with yellow wallpaper and a window seat where Grandpa and I would read together every night before bed. He'd point to the stars and say, "You see that one? That's yours, little star. I'm going to make sure it always shines." Promise? I'd asked. I promise, he'd said. No matter what happens, I'll always make sure you're taken care of. Grandpa William wasn't just wealthy, he was smart about money. He'd built Morrison Phillips and Associates from nothing, a small estate planning firm that grew into one of the most respected probate law practices in the state. He taught me about compound interest when I was 8, about the importance of documentation when I was 10, about how family and money can bring out the worst in people when I was 12. Your parents, he told me once when I was 15, they're my son and daughter-in-law, and I love them. But they've been living off my money since the day they got married. They've never had to work for anything, never had to plan for anything, and that's my fault. I enabled it. But you, he tapped my nose gently. You're different. You ask questions. You want to understand how things work. You're going to do something real with your life. I graduated high school with honors. Grandpa paid for everything: SAT prep, college applications, eventually Harvard Law School. He came to my graduation 3 years ago, beaming in the front row while I walked across that stage in my crimson robe, magna cum laude, top 10% of my class. Estate planning and probate law, he'd said afterward, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. Just like your old grandpa. Just like you, I'd agreed. I joined Morrison Phillips and Associates as an associate attorney. Grandpa was semi-retired by then, but he still came to the office twice a week, mostly to have lunch with me and check in on cases. We'd sit in his old office with the mahogany desk and the framed diplomas, and he'd quiz me on estate law like I was still in school. 6 months ago, on a Tuesday morning at 6:14 a.m., I got the call that Grandpa William had died in his sleep. Massive heart attack. Peaceful, they said. He was 93. The funeral was on a Saturday. My parents showed up in black designer clothes I'd never seen before, purchased specifically for the occasion. They'd barely visited Grandpa in the past 5 years, maybe twice a year, always around his birthday or Christmas, always just long enough to remind him they existed. At the reception, my mother pulled me aside. "Haley, darling, we should talk about arrangements. Your father and I will handle everything, of course. The estate, the house, all those tiresome legal matters. You shouldn't have to worry about any of it." "Grandpa had an attorney," I said. "Everything's already arranged." Her smile tightened. "Yes, well, family should handle family business." The will reading happened 2 weeks later. Grandpa's attorney, Marcus Chen, a man I'd known since childhood, sat at the head of the conference table. My parents sat on one side. I sat on the other. Marcus opened the file. "William Morrison's estate is valued at approximately $4.8 million, including liquid assets, property holdings, and business investments in Morrison Phillips and Associates." My father leaned forward. My mother's eyes sharpened. "The distribution is as follows," Marcus continued. "To Robert Morrison, my son, I leave my 1967 Corvette and the sum of $100,000. To Linda Morrison, my daughter-in-law, I leave my wife's diamond jewelry and the sum of $100,000. My mother's face went white. $100,000? "To my granddaughter Haley Morrison, I leave the remainder of my estate, approximately 95% of all assets, including my home on Sycamore Lane, all investment accounts, my share of Morrison Phillips and Associates, and all other property both real and personal." The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then my father exploded. "That's impossible. He couldn't have been in his right mind. We're his immediate family." "You abandoned his granddaughter when she was 5, Marcus said calmly. "He raised her. He paid for her education. She's an attorney at his firm. The will is ironclad." My mother stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "This is outrageous. We'll contest this. We'll prove he was manipulated." "You're welcome to try," Marcus said. "But I've been William's attorney for 32 years. I can assure you his mental capacity was perfect until the day he died. He specifically anticipated you might contest, which is why he prepared additional documentation." They stormed out. I sat there numb, staring at the papers in front of me. $4.8 million, 95%. Grandpa had left me nearly everything. That night, my father called. "You put him up to this." "I didn't know about the will, Dad." "Don't lie to me. You poisoned him against his own son. You manipulated a sick, elderly man." "He wasn't sick. He was sharp until—" "I'm contesting this, Haley. We're taking you to court, and we're going to prove you're not capable of handling this money. Look at yourself. You're 26 years old. You've never managed anything in your life." He hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the phone down. 2 days later, their attorney filed a formal will contest, the grounds undue influence and beneficiary incapacity. They claimed I'd isolated Grandpa from his family, manipulated him into changing his will, and that I lacked the maturity and judgment to manage a complex estate. The probate process froze all the assets immediately. I couldn't access the bank accounts, couldn't sell the house, couldn't touch any of it until the court resolved the contest. My salary from Morrison Phillips was gone too. Without Grandpa there, the firm's management questioned whether to keep me on during the family dispute. They put me on indefinite leave. I had $3,200 in my personal savings account. My rent was $1,400 a month. I found work at a small college cafe called The Daily Grind, 3 blocks from my apartment. It paid $12 an hour plus tips. I'd gone from reviewing trust documents in a corner office to wiping down counters and making cappuccinos for undergraduates. The manager, Carla, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and zero judgment. "You're overqualified for this," she said during my interview. "I just need something temporary," I told her. "Temporary is fine with me," she said. "When can you start?" I started the next day. The work wasn't difficult. Take orders, make coffee, clear tables, close up at night. The cafe had maybe a dozen regular customers, mostly students cramming for exams. I learned their usual orders. I learned to foam milk properly. I learned to smile when my feet ached after 8-hour shifts. My parents found out within a week. They hired a private investigator to follow me. On my 3rd day at the Daily Grind, someone took photos of me through the cafe window, me in my apron, carrying a tray of dirty dishes, wiping down tables. Professional photos, high resolution, time-stamped. Those photos ended up as Exhibit A in their amended will contest filing. Evidence of financial irresponsibility and poor judgment. Their attorney argued that my need to work minimum wage proved I couldn't manage money. Therefore, I couldn't be trusted with millions. The logic was insane. The assets were frozen because of their contest, which forced me to find work, which they then used as proof I was incompetent. But family court judges see these cases all the time, and not all of them care about logic. 3 weeks into my job at the Daily Grind, my parents showed up. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2:15 p.m., during the after-lunch lull. I was restocking napkins when the door chimed. I looked up and saw them standing there. My father in a wool coat, my mother in heels that clicked against the tile floor. Every customer in the cafe turned to look. "Haley," my mother said, her voice dripping with concern that sounded rehearsed. "Sweetheart, we've been so worried about you." I set down the napkin dispenser. "What are you doing here?" "We wanted to see how you were managing." My father looked around the cafe with obvious disdain. "This is where you're working?" "Yes." "Minimum wage," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Serving coffee. This is what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you, Haley." Carla stepped out from behind the counter. "Excuse me, is there a problem?" "No problem," my mother said sweetly. "We're just visiting our daughter. We worry about her, you understand. She used to have such potential." "Used to?" my father echoed. "Before she decided money was more important than family." I could feel every eye in the cafe on me, the 2 students at the corner table, the businessman reading the newspaper, the elderly woman with her crossword puzzle, all watching this play out like dinner theater. My face burned, my throat closed up, but I didn't cry, didn't defend myself, didn't give them the reaction they wanted. "Your shift ends at 3, right?" my mother asked. "Maybe we could talk. We have an offer for you. A way to resolve all this ugliness without dragging it through court." "I'm listening," I said. "Not here," my father said, glancing around with disgust. "Somewhere appropriate. We'll be at Russo's Steakhouse at 6. Come alone." They left. The door chimed again. The cafe was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then the businessman folded his newspaper. "That was your parents?" "Yes, sir." "Jesus," he muttered. "I'm sorry, kid." Carla came over and squeezed my shoulder. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. My hands were shaking, but I was fine. I'd been fine through worse. I showed up at Russo's Steakhouse at 6 p.m. exactly. My parents were already seated in a corner booth, 2 glasses of wine already half empty. "Sit," my father said. I sat. My mother slid a folder across the table. We've had our attorneys draw up a settlement proposal. You get $240,000, your 5% share of the estate, based on what we believe Dad originally intended before you influenced him. We get the rest. You assign a release saying you won't contest our management of the estate, and this all goes away quietly. 5%, I said. It's generous, considering, my father said. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. $250,000 is more than most people see in a lifetime. And if I don't sign? My mother's eyes went cold. Then we proceed to trial. We have evidence that you're financially irresponsible. We have evidence that you isolated Dad from his family. We have a judge who already seems skeptical of your capabilities. Are you really prepared to fight this, Haley? Look at yourself. You're working at a coffee shop. You can't afford the legal fees for a prolonged battle. We can. She was right about one thing. I couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle. My savings were down to $1,800. But I also knew estate law better than their attorneys did, and I knew Grandpa had prepared for this. I need time to think about it, I said. You have 72 hours, my father said. After that, the offer expires and we go to trial. I left the restaurant and walked for an hour in the cold, my mind racing. I needed evidence. I needed proof that Grandpa had known exactly what he was doing, that he'd made his choices with full mental capacity and clear intent. That night, I went to Grandpa's house on Sycamore Lane. Technically, I owned it now, but I hadn't been back since the funeral. The probate freeze meant I couldn't sell it, but I could still access it. The house smelled like dust and old wood polish. I walked through the familiar rooms, the kitchen where Grandpa had taught me to make pancakes, the living room where we'd watched old movies, the office where he'd shown me how to balance investment portfolios. His office. That's where he would have hidden something. I spent 3 hours searching. I went through every drawer, every file cabinet, every shelf. Nothing. Just old tax returns and business correspondence and family photos. Then I saw it. The picture frame on his desk. A photo of Grandpa and me at my law school graduation, both of us beaming. I picked it up, and something rattled inside. I turned the frame over. There was a small envelope taped to the back, yellow with age, my name written across it in Grandpa's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a key, small, brass, labeled with a number, 847, and a note in Grandpa's writing, Riverside Bank, North Branch, Box 847. When you need it, little star. I drove to Riverside Bank first thing Friday morning. The safe deposit box was registered under both our names, mine and Grandpa's. The bank manager verified my ID and led me to the vault. Box 847 was small, maybe 8 inches by 10 inches. Inside was a sealed envelope thick with papers. I took it to my car before opening it, sat in the parking lot with my hands trembling, holding my grandfather's final gift. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, dated 6 months before he died. It read, Dear Haley, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and your father is doing exactly what I knew he would do. He's contesting the will. He's claiming you're incompetent. He's probably pointing to something, anything, as proof that you don't deserve what I left you. I'm sorry I can't be there to fight this with you. I tried to prepare for every possibility, but I know Robert. He doesn't hear reason. He only hears documents. Do you remember when you were 7 and you asked me why the stars don't fall down? I told you they're held up by something invisible but real. Gravity, trust, promise. I told you I'd always make sure your star kept shining. I meant it. The original will is with Marcus Chen. His office is at 442 Harbor Boulevard, Suite 201. The copy I've left you here is incomplete, not enough to prove anything on its own in court, but enough for you to know I'm telling the truth about what I intended. Inside this envelope, a second copy of my will with my original signature and Marcus's notarization, bank statements from the past 10 years showing every transfer I made to your father, totaling $1.2 million in loans he never repaid, a signed affidavit from Dr. Patricia Valdez, my physician, confirming my mental capacity 6 weeks before my death, specifically addressing the possibility of a will contest. A letter I wrote to you when you were 5 years old, explaining why I was taking you in and what I hoped for your future. A private recording I made 3 years ago explaining my decision to leave you 95% of my estate, recorded in the presence of Marcus Chen and 2 witnesses. Don't show this to anyone yet. Not Marcus, not even Carla from that coffee shop. Yes, I knew you'd end up doing something practical and humble. Wait until the trial. Wait until Robert thinks he's won. Then present everything at once. You are not a waitress, Haley, though there's no shame in honest work. You're a Harvard Law graduate who specializes in the exact area of law your father is trying to manipulate. You're brilliant, prepared, and patient. You got all of that from your grandmother and none of it from him. When the time comes, stay calm. Present the facts. Let the evidence speak. Don't let them see you cry, not because crying makes you weak, but because your strength will destroy them more effectively than your tears ever could. All my love, little star. Your grandpa, William. I read it 3 times. Then I examined every document. The bank statements were devastating. Transfers of $20,000 here, $50,000 there, all marked loan to Robert. None ever repaid. The affidavit from Dr. Valdez was dated exactly 6 weeks before Grandpa died, typed on official letterhead, specifically stating that William Morrison was of sound mind and body with full testamentary capacity. The recording was on a small USB drive. I didn't have a way to play it in the car, but I trusted it was there. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, just holding the papers, feeling my grandfather's presence in every carefully prepared detail. He'd known. He'd known exactly what would happen, and he'd spent his final months making sure I had everything I'd need to fight back. I didn't cry. I smiled. Because I finally understood what he'd been teaching me all along. Patience isn't weakness. Preparation isn't paranoia. And sometimes the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves with their own assumptions. I called Marcus Chen from the parking lot. I have something you need to see. Come to my office, he said. Now. Then Marcus examined every document with the careful precision of a man who'd practiced estate law for 3 decades. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound. He recorded himself explaining his decision, Marcus said, shaking his head. He made Dr. Valdez do a formal capacity evaluation. He documented every penny he gave your father. William knew exactly what he was doing. Can we use this? I asked. Not yet. Your father's attorney would just claim we're introducing new evidence to counter their claims. We need to wait until trial. Let them present their case. Let them claim William was senile. Let them claim you're incompetent. Let them dig their own hole. Then we bury them with William's own words. How long until trial? Judge Peaton set it for 3 weeks from Monday. That's the probate hearing where he'll rule on the will contest. 3 weeks. I went back to work at the daily grind. I made coffee. I wiped tables. I smiled at customers and pretended everything was normal. My parents kept the pressure on. They showed up twice more at the cafe, always with witnesses, always making sure people saw me in my apron, heard them talking about the inheritance dispute. They were building their case in the court of public opinion, making sure everyone believed their story. Troubled granddaughter manipulates elderly man, gets exposed, falls apart. Their attorney submitted the photos to the court as official evidence. Young woman in cafe apron, dark circles under her eyes, clearly struggling financially. The narrative was obvious. This is what happens when an incompetent beneficiary gets in over her head. I let them believe it. I let them think they were winning. The night before the trial, Carla pulled me aside after we closed. Haley, I don't know what's going on with your family situation, and you don't have to tell me. But I want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, you're one of the best workers I've ever had. You're honest, you're dependable, you show up. That matters more than where you went to school or how much money you have. Thank you, I said. My voice cracked slightly. That means a lot. You're going to be okay, she said. I can tell. You've got something your parents don't have. What's that? Backbone, she said. The real kind, not the kind you buy. The trial started at 9 a.m. In courtroom 4B, Judge Marcus Peaton presiding. The gallery was packed, 30, maybe 40 people. Distant relatives who wanted to see the spectacle. Friends of Grandpa who'd known about the will. A few reporters who covered probate disputes for the local legal journal. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, Howard Brennan, a man in an expensive suit with silver hair and a voice like honey over gravel. I sat at the defendant's table with Marcus Chen, who'd agreed to represent me pro bono for Grandpa's sake. Judge Peaton called the court to order. We're here today regarding the matter of Morrison versus Morrison, a will contest filed by Robert Morrison and Linda Morrison challenging the validity of the will of the deceased, William Morrison. Howard Brennan stood up. Your Honor, my clients are the immediate family of the deceased. His son and daughter-in-law, who were left a mere pittance, while a young, inexperienced granddaughter received 95% of a $4.8 million estate. We contend this distribution was the result of undue influence exercised by the beneficiary over an elderly man in his declining years. What evidence do you have of undue influence? Judge Peaton asked. We have documented evidence that the beneficiary, Haley Morrison, isolated Mr. Morrison from his family for over 20 years, creating a dependency that she exploited to manipulate his estate planning decisions. Furthermore, we have evidence that she lacks the capacity and judgment to manage such a substantial estate. Brennan pulled out the blown-up photos. Me in my cafe apron, me carrying dirty dishes, me at the register, clearly working minimum wage. Your Honor, since her grandfather's death and the freezing of estate assets during this contest, Ms. Morrison has been employed as a waitress at a coffee shop. She earns $12 an hour. She has no significant savings. She has demonstrated no ability to manage substantial wealth. Judge Peaton studied the photos. Ms. Morrison, is this accurate? Are you currently working as a waitress? I stood up. Yes, Your Honor. And what was your occupation before your grandfather's death? Marcus squeezed my arm slightly, a signal to be careful. I was employed in the legal field, Your Honor. As what? As an attorney, Your Honor, at Morrison Phillips and Associates. A few murmurs in the gallery. Judge Peaton raised an eyebrow. You're an attorney? Yes, Your Honor. I graduated from Harvard Law School, magna cum laude, 3 years ago. I specialized in estate planning and probate law. The murmurs got louder. Brennan stood up quickly. Your Honor, Ms. Morrison's education is irrelevant. The fact remains that she's currently incapable of supporting herself without working minimum wage, which demonstrates her inability to manage a complex estate. Judge Peaton leaned back in his chair. Mr. Chen, does your client have any response to that? Marcus stood. Your Honor, with respect, Ms. Morrison is working minimum wage because the estate assets were frozen due to this very contest. She was placed on leave from her legal position to avoid conflicts of interest during the family dispute. The plaintiffs are essentially punishing her for a situation they created. That's absurd, Brennan shot back. A capable person would have savings, would have planned for contingencies. The fact that she's been reduced to serving coffee proves she lacks financial acumen. Judge Peaton looked at me again. I could see the skepticism in his eyes. The same skepticism I'd seen a dozen times in my career. Young woman, claims to be a lawyer, but here she is in a thrift store blazer, barely making rent. Ms. Morrison, he said slowly, you're asking this court to believe you're qualified to manage a $4.8 million estate. You're an attorney who specializes in estate law. And yet you're working as a waitress. Do you understand why that might seem contradictory? Yes, Your Honor, I understand how it looks. Because from where I'm sitting, Judge Peaton continued, and here it came, the setup I'd been waiting for. It seems your parents might have a point. A waitress handling millions? He shook his head slowly, his lips curving into a slight smile. That's quite a leap. The courtroom erupted in laughter. My father's attorney grinned. Several people in the gallery actually laughed out loud. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking. I stood there, my face burning, my hands gripping the table. I didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Judge Piton let the laughter die down. I'm inclined to agree with the plaintiffs on the question of capacity. However, we still need to address the undue influence claim. Mr. Brennan, do you have evidence that Ms. Morrison manipulated her grandfather? We have testimony from family members that she isolated Mr. Morrison, that she was the only person he saw regularly in his final years, that she had exclusive access to him during the time the will was drafted. Mr. Chen, response. Marcus stood up slowly. Your Honor, we have considerable evidence to present. But first, I'd like to enter into evidence a formal capacity evaluation performed by Dr. Patricia Valdez on William Morrison 6 weeks before his death. He handed the affidavit to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Piton. The judge read it, his expression unchanged. This says Mr. Morrison was of sound mind. It does, Your Honor. Dr. Valdez is a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. She performed a full cognitive evaluation specifically because Mr. Morrison anticipated this contest. He wanted there to be no question about his mental state when he made his decisions. Brennan stood up. Your Honor, this evaluation is convenient, but it doesn't address the undue influence question. An elderly man can be of sound mind and still be manipulated by a caregiver he's become dependent on. Fair point, Judge Piton said. What else do you have, Mr. Chen? We have a recorded statement from William Morrison, made 3 years ago in the presence of 2 witnesses, explaining his decision to leave 95% of his estate to his granddaughter. Marcus held up the USB drive. The bailiff set up a laptop and speakers. The courtroom fell silent. Grandpa's voice filled the room. Strong, clear, unmistakably lucid. My name is William Morrison. Today is September 14th, and I am recording this statement in the presence of my attorney, Marcus Chen, and 2 witnesses, Patricia Valdez and Daniel Torres, to explain my estate planning decisions. I am leaving 95% of my estate to my granddaughter Haley Morrison for the following reasons. First, she has demonstrated exceptional responsibility and judgment throughout her life. She graduated from Harvard Law School with honors and is currently practicing estate law at my firm. Second, my son Robert and his wife Linda have lived off my financial support for their entire marriage. I have given them over $1.2 million in loans over the past 20 years, none of which have been repaid. They have not worked or contributed meaningfully to society in any way I can document. Third, Haley was abandoned by her parents at age 5 and raised entirely by me. I paid for her education, her health care, her housing, and her future. She is, in every meaningful way except legal adoption, my daughter. I am making this recording because I know my son will contest my will. I know he will claim I was senile or manipulated. I want the court to know that I am making this decision with full mental capacity, without any pressure or influence from Haley, and with complete conviction that this is the right thing to do. My granddaughter has earned this inheritance through 21 years of being the family member who actually showed up, who actually cared, who actually built something with her life. My son has earned his $100,000 by being my son. That's all he's ever done. The recording ended. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Piton's face had changed. The amusement was gone. Mr. Brennan, your response? Brennan stood up slowly. Your Honor, this recording doesn't change the fact that Ms. Morrison isolated the deceased from his son. It doesn't change the fact that she's currently incapable of managing her own finances, let alone millions. Actually, Marcus said, it does, because William Morrison specifically addressed that in his planning. He left detailed financial documentation showing every transfer to his son, every unpaid loan, every instance of Robert and Linda Morrison living off his wealth while contributing nothing. He prepared for this exact scenario. Marcus handed another stack of documents to the bailiff. Bank statements, loan records, 20 years of financial dependency documented in black and white. My father's face had gone pale. My mother stared at the papers like they might bite her. Judge Peaton read through them slowly. When he finished, he looked directly at my father. Mr. Morrison, according to these records, you've received over $1.2 million from your father over the past 2 decades. Is that accurate? My father stood up. Those were gifts, Your Honor. Family support. They're labeled as loans. Semantics. My father wanted to help us. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with receiving help, Judge Peaton agreed. But you're asking this court to invalidate your father's will because you believe your daughter received too much while you received too little. These documents suggest your father had very specific reasons for his distribution. Brennan jumped in. Your Honor, the amount Mr. Morrison received during his father's lifetime is irrelevant to the question of the will's validity. We're simply asking the court to recognize that a young woman who can't even support herself shouldn't be entrusted with millions. And that's when I spoke up. Your Honor, may I address the court? Judge Peaton looked surprised. Ms. Morrison, you're not required to testify. I understand, Your Honor, but I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about my employment status, and I'd like to clarify. Proceed? I took a breath. My hands were steady now. Your Honor, I am not working as a waitress because I lack education or capability. I'm working as a waitress because the probate process froze all estate assets, which included my salary from Morrison Phillips and Associates. I needed income to pay rent while this contest was pending, so I found temporary work. That doesn't change the fact, Brennan started. I'm not finished, I said calmly. The plaintiffs have submitted photos of me in a cafe apron as evidence of poor judgment and financial irresponsibility. But those photos were taken during a 3-week period when I had no access to any of my grandfather's money because of their contest. They created the situation, then used it as proof I'm incompetent. Judge Peaton leaned forward. That's an interesting point. Furthermore, I continued, I'd like to submit my employment records from Morrison Phillips and Associates, showing my salary, performance reviews, and caseload. I'd also like to submit my Harvard Law School transcripts, my bar exam results, and letters of recommendation from 3 senior partners at the firm. Marcus handed the documents to the bailiff. They were things I'd had all along, just waiting for the right moment. Judge Peaton read through them. His expression shifted from skeptical to thoughtful to something that looked like embarrassment. Ms. Morrison, he said slowly, you graduated magna cum laude from Harvard Law School? Yes, Your Honor. Top 10% of my class. And you specialize in estate planning and probate law? Yes, Your Honor. The exact area of law we're currently practicing in this courtroom. A few people in the gallery laughed, but this time it wasn't at me. It was at the absurdity of the situation. A judge questioning whether a Harvard law graduate could manage money, while that graduate stood in front of him defending herself in a probate case. Judge Peaton set down the papers. Mr. Brennan, I'm finding your argument increasingly unconvincing. You're asking me to declare a Harvard-educated attorney incompetent based on 3 weeks of temporary employment during a probate freeze. Your Honor. Furthermore, Judge Peaton continued, his voice harder now, I'm troubled by the nature of this contest. The deceased left clear evidence of his intent, his mental capacity, and his reasons for his distribution. The plaintiffs appear to be motivated by greed rather than genuine concern for their father's wishes. My mother stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. She manipulated him. She turned him against us. Mrs. Morrison, sit down, Judge Peaton said sharply. You're out of order. She doesn't deserve that money. We're his real family. I said sit down. My father pulled her back into her seat, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped. The performance of the grieving, concerned parents had cracked, and underneath was just raw entitlement. Judge Peaton looked disgusted. I'm going to ask you one question, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. In the past 20 years, how many times did you visit your father? Silence. How many birthdays did you attend? How many holidays? More silence. According to the evidence presented, your daughter lived with her grandfather from age 5 to age 23. She visited him weekly after she moved out. She worked at his firm. She had lunch with him twice a week until the day he died. Where were you? My father's attorney tried to object, but Judge Peaton held up his hand. I've heard enough. This contest is without merit. William Morrison was of sound mind. He had clear reasons for his distribution, and he prepared extensive documentation anticipating this exact challenge. The will stands as written. The courtroom erupted, not in laughter this time, in gasps, whispers, exclamations of surprise. My parents sat frozen, their faces pale with shock. Furthermore, Judge Piton continued, I'm awarding attorney's fees and court costs to the defendant, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. You brought this contest in bad faith, and you'll pay for it. He banged his gavel. We're adjourned. I stood there for a moment, not quite believing it was over. Marcus put his hand on my shoulder. You did it, kid. William would be proud. My parents didn't look at me as they left. They just walked out with their attorney, their heads down, while the gallery buzzed with conversation. Several people I didn't know came up to shake my hand. Good for you, one older woman said. Your grandfather was a good man. He knew what he was doing. Outside the courthouse, Marcus walked me to my car. The probate freeze will be lifted within 48 hours. You'll have access to all the accounts, the property, everything. What are you going to do first? Thank Carla, I said. She kept me employed when I needed it. I want to make sure she knows I appreciate it. Marcus smiled. William raised you right. I went back to the daily grind that afternoon. Carla was behind the counter when I walked in, still in my court clothes. The same thrift store blazer, the same cheap shoes. How'd it go? She asked. I won. She came around the counter and hugged me. I knew you would. You've got that look? What look? The look of someone who knows exactly who they are, she said, no matter what anyone else thinks. I worked my last shift that night. Not because I had to, but because I'd told Carla I'd cover the evening rush, and I don't break my word. I made lattes. I wiped down tables. I said goodbye to the regulars who'd been kind to me during those 3 weeks when I had nothing. When I closed up, Carla handed me my final paycheck. $384, she said, plus $67 in tips. You earned every penny. Thank you, I said. For everything. You need anything? You know where to find me, she said. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my apartment in the city, not Grandpa's house on Sycamore Lane. I sold that property to a young family who reminded me of what family should be. I used some of the estate money to pay off my student loans, invest in a diversified portfolio, and start a small grant program for law students from non-traditional backgrounds. I'm back at Morrison Phillips & Associates, now as a senior associate with my name on the door. I handle estate planning for families who want to make sure their money goes to people who actually deserve it, not just people who share DNA. I don't talk to my parents. They tried to reach out twice. Once through an attorney offering to reconcile, once through a family member suggesting we move past this. Both times, I declined politely. Some relationships can't be repaired because they were never actually built in the first place. I visit Grandpa's grave every month. I bring fresh flowers and sit on the bench nearby, telling him about cases I'm working on, about the grant students I'm helping, about the life I'm building with the foundation he gave me. There's a photo on my desk at work. Me and Grandpa at my law school graduation, both of us grinning. Next to it is a small brass key, the key to safe deposit box 847, which I keep as a reminder that preparation isn't paranoia and patience isn't weakness. If you're watching this and you've ever been told you're not enough, not smart enough, not responsible enough, not worthy enough, I want you to know something. The people who love you don't ask you to prove your worth. They don't test you. They don't make you smaller to make themselves feel bigger. And if someone's trying to take from you what someone else wanted you to have, remember this. Documents don't lie. Evidence doesn't care about blood. And sometimes the best thing you can do is stay calm, stay prepared, and let people destroy themselves with their own assumptions. If you've ever had to stand in a courtroom, literal or metaphorical, and defend what's rightfully yours, type "I stood my ground" in the comments. Or if you walked away from family to protect yourself, type, I chose peace. Both are acts of courage. Both are valid. If this story meant something to you, check the description for more stories just like this one. Thank you for being here.